is the state attorney general the right person to do that job? Our chief investigative reporter, Lynn Kawano, continues our team coverage with more on why some are calling it a conflict of interest.
Because the Attorney General is appointed by the governor's office, the executive branch, some want the Attorney General off of the case.
Now that Sylvia Luke has made these statements, it's absolutely clear there's a conflict of interest and the AG should not be investigating her bosses.
Those with ties to the criminal justice system call it troubling that the state's top legal executive is in charge of the investigation into the lieutenant governor's campaign spending records to determine if criminal charges should be filed.
We should have a special prosecutor who is independent, who comes in and does the investigation. We do not need the Attorney General investigating another member of the executive branch.
Attorney General Anne Lopez announced last month that her office would take the case to determine if an influential state legislator improperly took thousands of dollars. A petition with nearly 1,000 signatures also called for simultaneous legislative investigations, which would be more open to the public.
We are still pushing for a legislative investigative committee to be convened so we can take action as a legislative branch. That's our duty.
So do we need to do something? Absolutely. I would like to see an independent investigation. Now, whether that's an independent prosecutorial investigation, I think the concerns raised about an executive investigating an executive is very problematic.
In a statement, Anne Lopez's office said there is no conflict because in 2022, the legislature established the Special Investigation and Prosecution Division with funding and permanent positions, specifically so the office would have the independence, expertise, and the capacity to investigate and prosecute public corruption, fraud, and other integrity-related crimes. It is this SIPD unit that is working the case.
Time is a factor. The statute of limitations for criminal charges runs out in 11 months. I'm Lynn Kawano, Hawaii News Now.